We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth. With FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist, Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Friday, August 14th, 2026, and we've got a smorgasbord of stories to cover down on. There's a bunch of them. We're going to have to churn and burn through it. It's one of my favorite days. Just no rhyme or reason. We're going to pull things out of a grab bag. It will be fun. We're going to talk about some stuff like Flock. Again, we've got an update because they're course correcting after the Washington Post story that we covered down on last week. The 911 in New Orleans is looking to use artificial intelligence, which is a problem for people who work as a first responder. The Southern Poverty Law Center saw some superseding indictments, and one of his former executives is now in the pokey. Blue state attorneys general have united together, but they've actually been together since before Donald Trump became president in order to #resist. Mexican inflation is now lower than the United States. Generation Z is preferring sports betting to investing in the stock market, and a famous professor from across the pond has been exposed as a fraud. Like I said, guys, lots to get to. Let's get after it. I want to set this up before we can go forward. We're going to have to go backwards. We covered some Flock stuff last week, and I think one of the big exposés was an exclusive from the Washington Post. So I want to sort of set the stage because I have several articles about Flock, which has been in the spotlight, about government surveillance, about private surveillance being deputized as the government, and a whole bunch of Americans are very upset, and justifiably so, and tip to all the people who got informed about this sort of stuff. But let's take a step back and remind you about what we're talking about with Flock. The Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, had this exclusive last week. The headline was how rogue officers turned a nationwide camera network into a tool for stalking. Now, authorities at this woman, if you happen to be watching us here on the Rumble or the YouTube or on Spotify, the authorities wound up arresting the police chief who was stalking her. He worked like 15 miles away. He was sending her some weird text messages, sort of following her. He was using Flock, who was abusing it. He wound up getting arrested and then committed suicide before he actually faced formal charges. But there were a whole bunch of other examples. And it was 50 examples of police officers, mostly dudes, using Flock to pursue women in a weird way. And some of them got arrested, some of them got fired, and some of them got slaps on the wrist, which is not necessarily a good look, seeing as how that's a major violation of policy. It's a major intrusion against privacy rights. But the stats, the number, the sheer volume of Flock cameras that are around the country, 120,000 cameras, 6,000 communities, 20 billion license plates are read every single month. And it's estimated here in the Washington Post that there's around 140 to 150,000 police officers who are using the Flock cameras. Now, if you extrapolate out that we have roughly 1 million law enforcement officers in this country, that's like 15% of the cops who have this tool at their fingertips. And look, it can be used for good, but it can also be abused. And that's ultimately the question. Do you want liberty or do you want security? Or is there some way that we can set up some guardrails that we can achieve both? And the last note that came out of this Washington Post piece was that in April, Flock had introduced this audit assistance feature. It was a new thing. It was optional. It wasn't required, but essentially the software was going to look within itself for suspicious activity and flag it. And then the agency would do whatever they wanted to with that information. They could say, hey, Officer Smith here seems to be looking up the same license plate over and over again. He's doing it when he's not supposed to be at work. And you all should take that under advisement, or maybe even lock him out of the system until we can adjudicate whether or not it's a righteous use of the tool. And at the time I said, what made sense to me if you really wanted to do a proper audit, if you really want to set up a logical guardrail to prevent the abuse of Flock from guys who just happen to walk past a woman they find attractive at Walmart and then just leer over and find out her license plate so they can track her and then maybe bump into her again, as lots of cops are wont to do, we should just have a case number. Your agency, your police department, your sheriff's office, they assign case numbers. It's a way to track what sort of investigation goes on. If you've ever been in an accident, you'll have a case number. You got to give it over to your insurance company so they can get a copy of the report. That's how we track things. So it could be a case number for your agency, or it could just be a case number that's attributable to using Flock for a legitimate law enforcement reason. And then if you have to put it in to a case number, then we can track back and see whether or not it's being used justifiably so. That was the idea that I proffered last week when we talked about it. And I guess I was Nostradamus, because an update comes again from the Washington Post. Headline: Flock unveils changes after Post report on police misuse of its network. Flock said it would start requiring officers to label every search with a criminal case number and automatically review all searches for abnormal activity, a previously voluntary feature. So that audit feature is now going to be required. Flock currently allows police departments to share their license plate data with other agencies, which is part of liaising. It's part of cooperating. We're in a modern age right now. We're not in the situation where Bonnie and Clyde rob a bank and then say, ollie, ollie, oxen free, we cross state lines. There's lots of communication that goes on between various agencies at the local, municipal, city, state, federal level. And what Flock allows these agencies to do with each other is to share the information. Now, what Flock is going to do to, I guess, appease those who want to see a whole bunch of illegal aliens to the tune of 30, 40, 50 million of them resist hashtag style, the federal government's effort, or proposed effort, proffered effort, supposed alleged effort to eject all of the illegal aliens from the country is, hey, we don't want Flock used to help ICE out. So we're going to opt out of that, but we want to cooperate with our other partners about violent crime. So that sort of nimbleness is going to be afforded, which I guess take what you will, because I want to see mass deportations, and that will probably rely on a lot of cooperation between local authorities, but you're not going to get cooperation from the LAPD or NYPD or Chicago PD to begin with. Now, Flock said it's still considering additional changes, including a function that would automatically lock out officers who have shown some red flags, which is probably an objectively good thing. There might be some hangups. Somebody might actually have a reason for it. But I think that sort of delay is necessary in order to set up a proper guardrail. Now, that's the update to this latest Flock expose exclusive that came from the Washington Post. I've had some other information that I've been digging into about it and what its actual capabilities are, because that has been presented to most people, as most people understand it. It just reads license plates. And then a license plate is tieable to a vehicle, and theoretically it could be tieable to a person because a person owns the vehicle. And it's a way for law enforcement to obtain that information and then just plot about where a person or a particular license plate travels and then extrapolate out that a person is traveling to those locations. So it's a surveillance tool. And they're looking to expand, or at least we're looking to expand, because there was pushback against these two efforts that I dug into. So I've got a couple articles from 404 Media, which is all over Flock. The headline here: Flock pitched a plan to turn Uber and Lyft drivers into roaming surveillance vehicles. Flock planned to use dash cams installed in hundreds of thousands of these rideshare drivers' vehicles and delivery vehicles to scan license plates that those drivers traveled past. Flock told the media outlet here, 404 Media, in an email, it never executed the partnership with Nexar, Nexar. They're the dash cam company. A lot of agencies use them. But the presentation still shows Flock's ambitious plan to conscript rideshare and delivery drivers to collect license plate data for its network. It's not clear whether Uber or Lyft or the delivery drivers would even have known. Maybe they would have been told that, hey, you got to install this dash cam. It's for your own protection in case there's any sort of allegation that you did something wrong, either through driving or the way you personally behaved. And then that information or that footage would be relayed over to Flock, which is then available for law enforcement. Now, they wanted to have roving surveillance, not just static, Not just a situation where if you looked online and were able to track where the different flock cameras are, theoretically, you might be able to avoid them. Well, no, no. Now the Uber and the Lyft and the delivery drivers would be driving all over the place, potentially capturing vehicle data to just get a more robust picture of where everybody is traveling at any given time. Now, that never got off the ground, according to Flock. Take them for what they're worth. But we have a couple of other things here, which they tried to say they backtrack on, but they really didn't. So, again, from 404 Media, this one license plate reader company Flock is building a massive people lookup tool. This comes from a leak. I guess there's some intellectual fellow travelers, some friendlies inside of Flock who are going to 404 Media because they get their hands on a bunch of stuff. This was the group that got the PDF document that I covered last week about how Flock was sending documents off to police officers, encouraging them to hard sell its product to their town councils and their city managers. Flock's new product, called Nova, will supplement license plate data with a wealth of personal information sourced from other companies and the wider web. It's not just enough to have the license plate. Flock wants to offer something bigger and bolder and more expansive, so more law enforcement agencies will say, ooh, we want that intel. Why don't we just pony up the cash and do it? If it saves just one life. Now, what could they offer and where would they get it? Talked about before, you have a license plate, tie it to a vehicle. The vehicle could be tied to a person. Now, that all of that could come from the license plate and from the databases that are already at the fingertips of police officers and sheriff's deputies out there. But there are other sources of information that might not necessarily be at their fingertips. And Flock was digging into how can we create this new product called Nova, which will definitely not only get the person who typically drives a car, but their family, their friends, their affiliates, all of that. So a couple of different ways that they were going to go about doing it. One was they wanted to go to an app that people used in order to not pay the parking meter, because that's old-timey stuff. It's up there with the telephone booth. Nobody puts quarters in to pay for the parking meter anymore. There's apps for that. There's cities that don't even actually offer parking meters anymore. They've already taken them down and they say, you got to use this QR code and use this app in order to pay for your parking. Well, Flock, in using this information for this new product called Nova, said, all right, well, what's tieable to somebody's account when they want to use this app to pay to park? Well, it's their name, their banking information, their email, their address, their telephone number, all of that. We could have all of that at our fingertips and then share it into our database, tie it to a vehicle, and now this information could be given over to law enforcement if they happen to want it. And that's just one example. You had commercially available data, healthy air quotes, because if you get a credit card, the credit bureau will have that information and they will sell your data. So Flock was like, well, we'll just buy it. It's out there. We can buy that and then hand it on over to law enforcement. You have public records like marriage licenses, property records, campaign finance records, all that's public. And they wanted to hoover that up and again, toss it into this product called Nova. And they wanted to also tie it to pre-existing databases that police and sheriff's deputies use all the time, like the 911 dispatch database or the case records management system, RMS, where you can see where histories of calls have gone and police reports have been written. And they wanted to put it into a gigantic database that could be used in order to pull in more information to tie individual people to vehicles and have it be their affiliates and their friends and their family. So we have a greater overall picture. Now, this came to light again because there were some leaks over to 404 Media and they tried to push back on it. Now, Flock said, oh, we're going to backtrack. Just like we did before, the backtrack with the Uber and the Lyft surveillance cameras. We are going to course correct our bad guys. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. As an aside, my boys are back to school and they're learning Latin right now. So every time they start talking in Latin, I just keep saying mea culpa, and they still don't know that it means my bad yet. All right. But what did Flock do in order to express that it was their bad? This comes from flocksafety.com. This is the way that they are communicating out publicly. Headline, correcting the record. Flock Nova will not supply dark web data. Dark web data, that was not in anything that I just talked about. Nothing that 404 Media communicated out there would indicate that Flock was using dark web data. There's something out there that's nefarious. That's where pedophiles go and drug dealers and hitmen. That app that I talked about that you use to pay for parking, that got hacked. And then that information was put out onto the dark web for a bunch of scammers to obtain and then try to run their scams on people because now they had their name and their phone number and their email address, potentially their banking information. Scammers wanted to obtain that, and the way that that information would be transmitted would be on the dark web. Now, because that app got hacked and the information was out there, Flock said, okay, we won't use information that is illegally obtained via a hack. But they didn't say they weren't going to use other information, again, like the marriage licenses and the property records and your voting records and the commercially available information from your credit bureaus. All that is still very much on the table. Now, the policy decision was made that Flock will not supply the dark web data. This is according, again, to Flock from their flocksafety.com, which they kind of have to say, because if they're going to acquire information from the dark web, it incentivizes people to do more hacks so that they can sell it to Flock. So this was more of a CYA on the messaging and maybe some legal consequences and ramifications. But still, that information Flock is still using, still trying to create an overall encompassing view of people, and this product Nova still exists. Nova tying the person to the vehicle. All right. Enough about Flock. Let's though talk about some AI stuff and how it relates to law enforcement and first responders in general, because actually this next one I want to get to is about AI taking 911 calls, and it's from a fireman website. It's called firefighterclosecalls.com. All right. Headline here is New Orleans becomes first major U.S. city to use AI for 911 calls, which has a couple of problems. The Orleans Parish Communications District, which gets over 1,000 emergency dials a day, over 1,000 911 calls per day. It's one of the highest volume of calls in the country, and they're routing 911 calls to an AI agent that decides which ones get bumped to a human dispatcher and which ones get handled by the bot itself. Pause. I can see the benign reason for this. I can see the efficiency for this. A lot of people call 911 for reasons that are not emergency. They're just having an argument with a friend, with a loved one, with a parent. And there's so many people having been a uniformed patrolman and being dispatched to, quote, disorderly person calls. So many of them were just like, my brother's being a jerk to me, so I called y'all. That call happened all the time. The final call that I had when I was on training. Now, when you become a cop, you graduate the academy, they don't just throw you in a patrol car and say, like, go do law enforcement. They side saddle you to a training officer. Now, in order to matriculate through the program, you're being assessed very much. It's a crawl, walk, run sort of program where you kind of observe your training officer a little bit. And then as you go on, he maybe lets you start to drive, maybe lets you kind of take the lead, and then eventually just pulls back and views how you do things independently. And eventually, if you pass the test, the assessment from the training officer's perspective, then you're cut loose and you're able to then go out and start doing full-time law enforcement. And you might even be moved to a different shift. You never know. The last thing that I did on training was being dispatched to a disorderly person call. Arrived there were two sisters. They lived together. I said, what's going on? Again, my training officer's in the background. You handle this. I'm fly on the wall. I'm just watching. If things go break bad, I'll have your back. But otherwise, pretend I'm not here, Steve. Roger that. So what's going on? And the woman said, my sister left the hamburger meat on the windowsill, so I called y'all. No further information. I turned to one sister. I said, you go in that room. I turned to the other sister. I said, you go in that room, close the doors, lock them, and we're done here. And I turned around, and my training officer just nodded along. He goes, You're ready. You get it. Legitimate police calls. People call police all the time. So I understand wanting to use tools that will not tie up human 911 dispatchers with the hamburger meat call. I get it. There could be somebody bleeding. There could be somebody involved in domestic assault. But there are situations where people call 911 and, quote, order a pizza as a code because they're involved in some sort of domestic violence situation. Does Hal know that? And that actually gets pointed out here in this piece over from the firefighter close calls. So digging back into it again, because New Orleans, the busiest parish, is going to use AI to answer calls. Now, what they give you here is a little bit more about other cities, and I was unaware of this. The article itself says New Orleans becomes the first major city, but that's a little bit not true, because Atlanta uses AI to help live dispatchers locate callers faster, which, okay, that's fine. That's a human actually in charge. Seattle started using a similar technology 2 years ago to help dispatchers decide which callers deserve a rapid response and which don't. And they've used it for 2 years and didn't even disclose it to the public. So this is a trend now. This is moving that way. And I think it's inevitable that this is a tool that can be used, but there certainly has to be some guardrails. I think I've even talked about it before on the podcast. My son and I were out. I was running. He was riding a bike, and he saw a wallet side of the road. It's a Sunday afternoon. Yeah, I could call the police. I'm not going to call 911, though. I called the non-emergency line. AI did that. AI picked up, gave him my name, my address, some of the details, and a police officer was dispatched to our house. I think that's probably where we go with this until we can figure out exactly all the hiccups. Because if someone calls with a ordered pizza and it really means that old boy is tuning me up and I need somebody here yesterday to save my life, I'm not necessarily sure that the ones and the zeros are going to be able to flesh that information out there. And, that's a problem that's going to get handled at a local level. But we all have a problem with artificial intelligence as it pertains to the governance of our nation. So I want to now pivot over to this story from the Washington Post, which is about Congress and its use, the prolific use of artificial intelligence. The headline here is "Chatbots are doing the work of Congress with little oversight." Oh, another example of Congress doing things good for me, not for thee. Here we go. Across the Capitol, lawmakers and staffers are using AI to write speeches and news releases, sort constituent mail, and prepare questions for congressional hearings and draft amendments. Even as politicians are debating how to govern AI, they're still going to use it for themselves. Again, good for me, not for thee. The House of Representatives is all about Microsoft because I guess Microsoft is all of its computer software. So they bought 6,000 Copilot licenses. Copilot is the AI chatbot from Microsoft. 6,000. There's 435 congressmen. How did you buy 6,000 of them? How many staffers need to use the chatbot at any given time? It seems like not a good use, not good stewardship of the American people's tax dollars, but it is what it is. They bought 6,000 Copilot licenses last year, and they're extending it, and they want to buy more. Now, they give a couple of examples. One, they start at the top. They start using the actual senators and representatives and their way that they are interfacing with AI. But really, the more important thing that we'll get to in a second is the staffers, because the staffers run Washington, D.C. There's just too many 80-plus-year-old representatives or senators out there who don't have any interest in going home with their grandkids, and they just need minders. They need to be in a nursing home, and the staffers kind of fill that role for them so they can cling on to power with their cold, dead hands, sometimes actually dead hands, when the collagen is no longer existing in their skin. It's just their bones that are clinging on to this power. And the staffers are actually doing the speech writing, and they are writing the questions, and they just put the script in front of the representative who looks down and never looks up and just reads it off, like Chuck Grassley, 94,000 years old. So a couple of examples of the high name recognition people. Tommy Tuberville. I think he's going to run for governor of Alabama. He might have already won the primary. I don't know. I don't follow Alabama politics, but he's a senator right now. He, according to the Washington Post, talks to ChatGPT because he puts it on in his car when he's driving and has the audio feature, and he asks it questions about Medicare and Medicaid. So he's a nerd, but then he accepts what ChatGPT says back to him. No questions asked. I mean, it's artificial intelligence. It's been shown to have a bias, but even the good senator acknowledges it puts him on the right path. It might not be 100% right, but he's using this to make his decisions about Medicare and Medicaid. You have another Republican, Mike Flood. He's the congressman from Nebraska. He consulted the chatbot while working on the bipartisan housing bill, the bill that was pushed on through and is going to authorize the use of Section 8 housing in the suburbs. And it's going to stop those investment institutions from buying up cheap houses that they can be turned right around and repaired and brought up to code and made available to people. Because we don't like them, because we don't like BlackRock. Well, I don't like BlackRock either, but that would theoretically make more houses available. That same bill that said that we should incentivize, steal money from you, I mean tax it, and then reallocate it to other areas of the country to incentivize them to change their zoning codes and allow duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes in the suburbs. You know, that sort of a bill. This guy, Mike Flood, he relied on AI to help him with that research. They cite Liz Warren. She says that she looks up, it's the Washington Post. So all the Republicans are doing things that are like kind of sketchy, and they make them look dumb. They make them look like they're completely beholden to what the ones and zeros say. And then they make the Democrats look like, well, that's reasonable use. And they say that Liz Warren uses it to look up demographic information. I guess she just like asks, how many Black people live in Massachusetts? And it says like 2. Staffers, though. Alluded to staffers. Staffers run the Hill. There are very few representatives out there who actually have their mental faculties or actually care about doing things. They get elected to be something, not to do things. You don't want to do anything, then you work yourself out of a job. You get elected to be there. You get reelected on the promise of doing things. You never get elected to actually do things. The staffers. There's a Republican aide. He used Copilot, the Microsoft chatbot, to write appropriations amendments. And the subcommittee that he worked for used AI to suggest witnesses for a hearing and to help generate the questions. So the completely contrived hearings that we always see all the time, they get on TV. So the likes of Jim, spelled with a G, Jordan, can have his hearing and then go on Sean Hannity and ask you to donate to his campaign and follow him on Twitter, maybe write a strongly worded letter. The AI is contriving that entire theater that exists there. So who should we ask to come and be a witness to inform us theoretically about this topic? Somebody who is knowledgeable about it, somebody who really is uber focused on this sort of topic. What are they really prompted with? Who has the biggest Twitter following? And I have that on authority. That's what Jim Jordan uses, by the way. Whoever has the biggest Twitter following and can be characterized as being in a particular lane gets invited to the hearings. And then we don't want to actually author our own questions because we're not interested in the answers. We just want theater. So we'll have Grok or ChatGPT or Copilot write the questions for the witness that it itself selected for us to invite to Washington, all at your expense, of course. Another chatbot is called Claude. Claude runs an office communications budget, the taxpayer-funded mail ads sent to constituents. So it is determining how to use the funds that you have already had stolen, I mean tax from you, to turn right around and mail you a document from your congressman's office with his letterhead that says, look at all the great work I'm doing. Completely on autopilot. One Democrat staffer said that his office has been exploring something new, feeding AI his boss's past statements so the tool can write in the lawmaker's voice. Well, that would be used for op-eds that are submitted to the likes of the Washington Post or the New York Times. That could be used for floor speeches. That could be used for questions to ask a witness during a hearing. It could be used for stump speeches. So not only these guys completely fake, which we knew already, they're completely fake and propped up by ones and zeros that they have no theoretical understanding of. And these guys are responsible for drafting the legislation that will govern the way that artificial intelligence interfaces with you every single day. And when you have that, you have the chance for regulations to come out that will ban things that do actually impact your life. At least they impact mine in my household, because Madam Friend, she might be a little unhappy with this one. So let's go over to Dexterto for this headlines. FCC bans future Roombas from being sold in the US. I guess we don't want another Joe Biden presidency. Okay, the government says the restrictions are intended to address national security concerns because all these robots come from China, and China is mapping out houses for people who have the robots, unless they turn the feature off. The companies are seeking approval for future products will reportedly need to demonstrate domestic manufacturing or commit to investing in the U.S. manufacturing in order to receive a waiver. So as long as China is willing to build some sort of a plant, they can continue to obtain the information in your house. The determination references previous reporting on vulnerabilities allowed thousands of internet-connected robot vacuums to be remotely accessed and controlled by a PlayStation 5 controller. That is a crazy, insane vulnerability. I mean, whoever plotted that out was like, all right, this is a long con. We're going to create these robot vacuums that are super useful. No longer you're going to have to push that Hoover around anymore. The Roomba will do it. While you're at work during the day, you come home to clean floors. They got the mop feature on them now. And once those Americans get addicted to that, maybe around not version 2 or 3 or 4, but version 5 of the PlayStation will somehow be able to interface with the Roomba, and then we can take control of it and weaponize it somehow or drive it around for surveillance purposes of a house. That is a strange and bizarre way that this thing was actually hacked, but it's true. So the restrictions are only going to apply to newly authorized devices and will not affect many of the robots that are already in your house or that are already for sale because they're older models, which is actually a relief to Madam Friend because she just got a new one and she's really excited about it. All right. Let's go over to some other stuff. But before we do, let's plug the show for today. American Radicals Podcast comes to you guys as a reminder every noontime Eastern. If you happen to be watching us on YouTube and Rumble, please give us a nice thumbs up and the follows and the subscribes. Drop in some comments. If you're on iTunes, the 5-star reviews are awesome. You can also head on over to the Spotify channel. Everything is housed under the umbrella of AmRad Pod, and Spotify is really good because it's for the per capita payouts for viewership and listenership. Spotify actually is the best. So if you happen to have the ability to pick your source, pick your platform, Spotify, I beseech you, please head on over there. That again is at AmRadPod. And the administrative reminder, the final time, next week only, we're doing the collab, the American Radicals Podcast at the mic. We will be 0700 Eastern time next week. The channel stay the same. You can just, if you want to do the live show, it'll be earlier in the day, but it'll always be available later on if you want to catch it on Rumble, YouTube, or Spotify, and I'll schedule the ad to run now. Let's now head on to an update to the Southern Poverty Law Centers, the trials and tribulations. Well, not trials yet, but again, like we did for the flock cameras, let's give a little bit of a background, a little bit of a reminder, because we talked about this before, and it's worth just going into it again. So the older story that came out was that the FBI had indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center, and particularly there was one person who was a boss there who was of definite interest. The headline from the New York Post: SPLC boss funneled $1.2 million to lover in a neo-Nazi group, and the pair even had a joint bank account. Now, the serendipitous timing of this indictment came out right after we actually talked about this woman, Heidi Beirich, on a completely unrelated thing. Now, Heidi Beirich, she worked over at Southern Poverty Law Center. She was used in the January 6th committee by the Democrats when they said that it was an insurrection that tried to overthrow the government, even though Donald Trump was the president on January 6th, and they didn't have anything to actually do it. In fact, if the January 6ers wanted to, and this is kind of weird and off-putting, but I think it's true, the people on January 6th, if they wanted to overthrow the government, they could have all turned into cannibals and taken one bite and have eaten all of the Capitol police officers and representatives. That's the sheer numbers difference. And the reality is they were unable to thwart our democracy or overthrow the government because they didn't have any interest in doing that. But this woman, Heidi Beirich, she testified because she's an expert on extremism. And her background was at Southern Poverty Law Center. What they were doing was paying informants, like the FBI does, to infiltrate groups like the FBI does. And specifically at the SPLC, they want to infiltrate white nationalist groups, conservative groups, because they have a political leaning. And they were running the playbook that the FBI loves to do. Infiltrate these groups, look for retards, report back on us. Now, Heidi Beirich got romantically entangled with one of her sources, who we don't know the name of. We knew him as, what was it, F9? Yeah, F9. He infiltrated this white nationalist group. He stole some documents for her. He collected hundreds of thousands of dollars, actually into the millions, got like to over $1 million. They put it in a joint bank account. And eventually, when Heidi Beirich was reporting using the documents that this informant slash boyfriend of hers was providing, they also paid somebody else to take the fall for him. That was the background that the New York Post reported on. Well, we got a little bit of an update on this one because there has been a superseding indictment that has come out of the Department of Justice, which is extra charges. Hey, the last indictment is still good. We just are coming in with some new, fresh charges because we've looked through the code book and we found some additional violations of the law, or we've done further investigation and we have additional violations of the law. Maybe we have extra suspects who need to be taken into custody. And that's exactly what happens here, because the original indictment that came down was against the Southern Poverty Law Center itself as an organization. And I said it then, and I still contend, it's kind of a tough case to make because Southern Poverty Law Center is a nonprofit. They take donations from a bunch of dyed-in-the-wool leftist communists. Were they really defrauded? Do they actually care, or do they only care about the message? Who is your victim here? So I could see it being a difficult case to make because, again, who comes forward with it? Maybe some sort of a banking regulation, but is it really going to be the silver bullet to take down the Southern Poverty Law Center, which up until recently was a reliable source for the FBI, for its intelligence bulletins and products, and for its training? I got Southern Poverty Law Center training when I went to the FBI Academy. That training told me that pro-lifers were a greater threat to the homeland than radical Islamic terrorists. So the update, though, the superseding indictment, this one comes from Daily Signal because Tyler O'Neill, who writes over for them, he's been on top of SPLC for years. This is like the FBI is for me, SPLC is for Tyler O'Neill. Headline: breaking, former SPLC chief financial officer arrested. Attorney General Blanche confirms. And this is Heidi Beirich. Authorities arrested Heidi Beirich, former CFO from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Tuesday as part of a fraud case against the SPLC. The newly unsealed superseding indictment against the Southern Poverty Law Center and Heidi Beirich includes the initial 11 counts, the first time through. I guess that's what a superseding indictment does. It cites back to the old ones. So we have the original OG 11 criminal counts, but includes 2 more counts. 3 of the counts include Heidi Beirich, wire fraud conspiracy, conspiracy to submit false statements to a federally insured bank, and conspiracy to commit concealment money laundering. All right, white-collar crimes, not my lane, but anytime that you lead off with the word conspiracy, I get a little bit nervous. I get a little bit nervous that you have an actual righteous case, because you conspired to do it means that you got into a group and agreed to do this thing, and one person in the group took an overt act. That's all that's required for a conspiracy. So taken out of the context of a white collar case, think of it like a bank robbery crew. 4 guys get together and they say, we want to rob the bank. We want to rob this Bank of America on the corner of Main and First. All right, we now have our group, 4 guys with an agreement, but it's not a conspiracy until one of the 4 guys takes an overt act. Overt being some sort of an act that will bring this plot into fruition. You don't actually have to rob the bank, but let's say one of the guys goes to the hardware store and buys some ski masks. Well, that's an overt act. Now we can charge them all with conspiracy to commit a bank robbery, theoretically. You would hope to have more evidence of that, but theoretically. White collar context. So she agreed to commit wire fraud. I don't know. Again, a little bit out of my depth on the wire fraud stuff, on the white collar stuff, but it doesn't seem to be the strongest of cases. But nevertheless, we do see some accountability for a truly evil organization like Southern Poverty Law Center, and for one of those people like Heidi Beirich, a truly evil person who I think I have her photo here. Yeah, let me throw that up here before we move on to the next story. This is the face of evil, who is Heidi Beirich, who went and testified to Congress that grandmas who went to the Capitol on January 6th presented a true threat to the dissolution of the United States government. Heidi Beirich.
Classic awful. AWFL, affluent white female liberals. They're a scourge.
Let's pivot over now to a story from Center Square, which is all about states' rights and a bunch of blue states, attorney generals getting together. And I got to give you the bad news here, guys. This is a good strategy. Headline: Democrat AGs plan to sue Trump nearly 7 months before he was reelected. Bombshell. We need breaking in front of this one. Not so much, but what are the details? At least 22 Democrat attorneys general, so 22 different states, the top law enforcement official, appear to have signed a common interest agreement. 0 Republicans appear to have signed it. The document was signed 3 months before Joe Biden exited the race and Vice President Kamala Harris became the Democrat nominee. It was signed 7 months before Trump was reelected, 9 months before he was inaugurated. State attorneys general have sued Donald Trump, the administration, nearly 100 times since he took office. The coordinated effort appears to have the nickname the Project for Federal Accountability. A couple things here. One, these states spent millions of dollars on these lawsuits. Lawsuits ain't free. Attorneys general have money at their fingertips. It comes out of the Treasury for the states. So theoretically, states are stealing, taxing their citizens, and some of that money is getting routed to these lawsuits. Now, a lot of states elect their attorney general with the understanding that that attorney general will bring lawsuits when it is necessary. So to say, oh, they're wasting millions of dollars. I think California, their state assembly authorized like $25 million to bring lawsuits against Donald Trump. That's what they do. All right. These agreements are perfectly normal. They happen all the time. What's unusual, I guess, here is that it was an agreement in anticipation of Donald Trump winning the election. At least that's what is implied here. But to me, it would make sense that, well, any Republican, I don't think that when this agreement was made that Donald Trump had even secured the nomination, but he was sort of the presumptive nominee. But it would make sense to me for like-minded attorneys general from either red states or blue states to want to bond together in order to bring forward necessary and proper lawsuits against an out-of-control administration. Missouri and Louisiana did that against Joe Biden. Remember that whole thing where they said that they were going into social media companies and they were colluding with them against dis, and malinformation? And then Missouri has won some victories in that way. Missouri and Louisiana. Missouri gets the credit because they're the top line name. But there was some coordination going on between the attorneys general of those two states, and I think a couple of more, actually. The communications that went on here gets a little shady because they're confidential, because they're legal documents. So maybe the people who are in these states are not getting the opportunity to assess whether or not the attorney general is on the up and up here, or it's something that they could take into consideration when they go to the ballot box. But that's kind of a stretch because it's going on in these deep blue states. So the Democrat basically has a guarantee of victory. And the last thing gets pointed out here is that these attorney generals are using their achievements with these lawsuits to fundraise and to campaign to win high office and to get reelected as the attorney general. Well, every single politician does that. That's why the AI, which is taking taxpayer funds in order to route mailings back to the constituents, it's not bragging about how the senator or the representative didn't do anything other than scratch his butt and go meet with a lobbyist last week. It's going to say things like, he introduced legislation. He held a hearing that was pre-scheduled by AI and invited the witness by AI, and the questions were scripted by AI. Well, they'll leave that part out, but all of the actions that they take are with an eye towards getting reelected or getting elected to higher office. We're back to, you get elected to be something, not to do something. And the thing that you do should just be sort of getting your name out there. So I don't necessarily have a problem with this. I actually think it's a good idea. When we get President Newsom or President AOC in 2029, I would like to see an energetic attorney general from a red state like Florida or Texas or Oklahoma. Pick your red state, partner with other energetic attorneys general to throw up as many speed bumps as you can. That's the way that a small R republic works. That's the way that states' rights works. That's a very 10th Amendment sentiment, and I'm fully in favor of it. So I like the strategy. I'd like to see it applied both ways, but that remains to be seen from Republicans who, again, are probably the worst offenders of, we just want to be here, not actually do anything. All right. I've got couple more stories I want to touch down on before we close it out for the week, guys. And again, on this smorgasbord, saw this one, and guys, we're losing to Mexico. That ain't good. This comes from the Mexico News Daily headline. Inflation in Mexico is now lower than in the United States. Why it's such a big deal. Now, I would recommend this article not just because you want to feel bad about our United States basement doing better on us on economic policy, but actually they do a pretty good job of explaining what inflation is and how there's some downstream consequences of it. And it's done in a very straightforward way, not very nerdy. So if you just want to get up to speed on what inflation is and how it's tied to interest rates and employment and all these sorts of things, it is a good reference for you. The link to this story is in the show notes for today. But in the United States, our target is 2% inflation. Mexico's is 3%. Now, that doesn't seem like much, but over time, that compound interest, that's a big, big difference. And when historically one country has a higher target inflation, again, making the money in your bank worth less and worth less by 2% a year, or in the case of Mexico, 3% a year, that means that the country with the higher inflation over time will have higher interest rates, and its money, in the case of Mexico, its peso, or in the case of the United States, its dollar, will be less valuable than the other currency is, meaning that, well, we're just increasingly cheaper and cheaper and cheaper in Mexico versus the United States, at least historically. Now, over the last 50 years, the US inflation rate has been lower than Mexico all of the time, with the exception of like one blip on the radar in 2022 when our inflation under Joe Biden, the human Roomba that was authorized to come into this country, was like 8% and theirs was like 7.9. So basically on par with each other. But now most recent inflation data shows that 3.3 inflation percentage in Mexico, 4.2 in the United States. So we're almost a full percentage point higher than Mexico. So when one country runs higher inflation, you get higher interest rates, you get more volatility, and real incomes of the people relative to the other country are actually going down. So that's a problem. We're losing to Mexico, which might be a solution, guys, to our $20 burrito problem that I saw being reported all over social media last weekend. Let's just go to Mexico. The burritos will probably be cheaper. Okay. If you are interested in going to Mexico for a $20 burrito or peso burrito, maybe you should bet on some sports. How's that for a transition? Let's go to this one. This comes from investmentnews.com. The headline here, sports betting is pulling Gen Z dollars away from investing. This is according to a survey from this organization called Betterment. The survey was conducted in April, 1,000 investors across 4 generations. I imagine that was probably boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Z. 52%, over half of the Gen Z respondents had taken money that they originally allocated for investing in the stock market and did it on sports betting. 26% of Gen Z now treat sports betting as a deliberate part of their long-term financial strategy. That's insane. That's crazy. But it's a different way of thinking, I guess. Maybe they're asking the chatbot who they like in tonight's baseball game. But that doesn't make sense to me at all. That's a complete disconnect. That's a generational difference. And we'll see how that goes for them. But of course, if the stock market crashes because AI fails, then maybe Gen Z will be laughing all the way to the bank as they put everything they have on the outcome of tonight's WNBA game. All right. I've got one more that I want to touch on because this is a fraud case, as long as we're talking about like Southern Poverty Law Center fraud. Let's talk about just this British professor fraud that's been out there for a couple of days now that I've seen. Let me throw this up there because another face of evil. That's a dude, but if you ask me, I would call him one of these.
Classic awful AWFL, affluent white female liberals. They're a scourge.
He is not white, but he definitely looks like a Karen or maybe an Ibram X. Kendi knockoff. Let's find out the details here. This famous college professor from Cambridge University, his name is Jason Arday, professor of sociology of education. He has a PhD in education from Liverpool. On his appointment to Cambridge, he was touted as the youngest Black professor in the university's history. So all about DEI. We got to have somebody who's young and Black. He presented himself as somebody who was an actual miracle. He said he was diagnosed as being autistic as an infant. He was nonverbal until he was 11, and he was illiterate until he was 18 years old. And then all of a sudden, he's a professor at Cambridge. He wrote a PhD, and he essentially describes how Black scholars have to deal with racism. Not a whole bunch of information after that. Now, how did this guy get found out? Somebody looked at his dissertation and did some sort of a reference tool. It was probably an AI tool, and found that he had lifted about 100 different citations or references in his dissertation from somebody else's racist dissertation. So exposed him as a fraud. 100 passages from the dissertation were completely plagiarized. He also listed in his bio that he was a visiting professor at Ohio State, and they have no employment records of that. He said that he had prior professorial roles at 2 different colleges that he had worked at, but he wasn't a professor, so he lied completely about his work history. He lied about multiple awards that he had. And when the heat became really, really hot on this guy, he said that, well, I can't be blamed for my plagiarism because I'm autistic, and I recognize that to be just mimicking what other people write. So it's my autism. It's not that I've stolen somebody else's intellectual work. As little intellect is involved in writing a PhD dissertation about how Black scholars face some sort of racism in academia when they are doing backflips, backbends in order to employ them as professors to say that they have the youngest Black professor in the history of the school. So he said it was actually my autism, and then eventually resigned. And in his resignation letter, they ran it against AI, and he used AI chatbots to write his resignation letter. So perfect way to expose it, and just a way to kind of close us out for the week on this Friday smorgasbord with a nice laugh, because I like to see people get exposed for who they are. Truth has a way of kind of working itself out in the end. Okay, so that is the last story I have for today. But it's a Friday, and I want to feel good. I did see a video that I want to play, I guess as a quasi palate cleanse. I will risk it on this one alone. You'll understand why in a second. Guys, we have a new mile record pushing a stroller. Let this go this one to play.
Fastest mile while pushing his child in a stroller. The dad, who was a college distance runner, finished the Guardian Mile in just 4 minutes and 17 seconds, about 9 seconds better than the record recognized by Guinness. The dad accomplishing the fast feat, all while his turbocharged toddler kicked their legs in an apparent attempt to help their dad, finishing 15 seconds before his nearest competition.
I think that's insane. That's insane, even if you're not pushing a stroller. Imagine getting on a treadmill and putting the speed to somewhere around 15 and holding that pace for a full mile. That's what that dude did, pushing a toddler in a stroller. Look, I've pushed my share of Bob's strollers. I pushed my stroller so much that I had to replace the tires on it because the tread wore out. I used to have this weekend tradition with my boys. My older one, when he was real little, I'd push him and he was take a nap. I mean, that was, if there's new dads out there, you want to find out a hack, you want to get in shape and avoid the dad bod, that's what you do. Say, hey, mom, I'll take the little guy. I'll push him. You have some you time. You get your PT in for an hour, 2, maybe a little bit longer. Have some bonding experience with the kid. He normally falls asleep. Then you come back. It's time to trade off. That's the hack. That's how you do it. I pushed my older son until he called me out for being too slow. It was a Father's Day and I was pushing him back and we were like a mile from home. And he goes, Dad, I want to go on what he called the Big Hill. Now, the Big Hill was a college that was like a half mile from our house. And it was a detour and I was tired and it was Father's Day and I didn't want to go. But, you know, beast mode, dad mode, we got to do it. So I said, okay. And I started pushing him up this hill. The hill was steep enough that I felt like I could reach out and touch it in front of me. So we were barely moving. And my son said, Dad, why are you going so slow? And I said, I'm very tired. It's very steep. And he said, suck it up, buttercup, like a true baller. And that was the last time I pushed him because I don't need negative reinforcement. I need encouragement, like that toddler was giving to his dad there, which was awesome. So that dude comes in at like 4 minutes and 12 seconds, setting the record for the mile pushing a stroller. Congratulations to him. All right, let me close it out here. I got a nice biblical worldview as well to send you off on your weekend. Comes from Psalm 107, verse 1. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Guys, let's just be aggressive, be assertive, be proactively looking for solutions to problems. You know, we have the battle over surveillance with the flock cameras, pushing back on it. These exclusives have come out. People have expressed their displeasure with it. And we've seen some reforms that are pushing the ball in the opposite direction to at least get some guardrails up to make sure that we're defending against intrusions into our privacy. You might want to criticize the blue states for hashtag resisting the president of the United States before he became the president of the United States again, but they're embracing the 10th Amendment. That is a strategy that, again, an energetic attorney general should partner with intellectual fellow travelers in order to resist the next guy when the political pendulum switches back to the other side. We're going after Southern Poverty Law Center. We're going after those executives who said the lies that we saw over the years and years, that white supremacy was on the rise, and that grandmas who went to the Capitol and tried to express themselves and exercise their First Amendment, they were a threat to democracy. Well, you know what? Now it's time to pay the piper, especially when you laundered over $1 million to your own personal bank account. And Gen Z, preferring sports betting to the stock market because they don't trust our money supply. They don't trust our government, which uses AI. I kind of get it. Thinking outside the box. So good on them, I guess, at least. I hope it works out for them. And then expose the frauds of like a professor who traded on racism in order to attain positions of esteem and authority. Let's expose that and root that out and call it out for what it is. So good way to close us out for the week, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. I plan to be back with you on Monday here on the American Radicals podcast, 7 a.m. Eastern time with Keith Malinak. It's the collab. We'll see you then, guys. And until then, have a great weekend.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRad.